Hello everyone! Today I wanted to give you a full-length tutorial on how I made this Cookie Monster flower pot. Before we start, I'd like to take a look at a previous flower pot that I made. This is an Oscar the Grouch flower pot that I made last year, but I didn't record the process. I thought it would be a cool thing to show you, which is why I'm making Cookie Monster this time. I will be using the exact same techniques that I used on Oscar, so you can use these steps to make whatever character you'd like. And that's not just Sesame Street characters, I mean, these are basic steps, so you can use them to make any character you want. Alright, let's get started! The paint job on the flower pot doesn't need to be anything too detailed. Oscar's flower pot was just a cartoony looking trash can that I used reference to paint. For Cookie Monster, his flower pot is just going to look like a cookie jar. Obviously you can do whatever you want, but it's really just as simple as that. As of right now, Oscar and Cookie Monster are the only character pots that I've made. Character pots being flower pots with sculpted characters in them. I have lots of ideas for more character pots, but you'll have to wait and see what those are. They aren't more Sesame Street characters. I'm not just doing Sesame Street characters, that would be insane. For this next part, we're going to need some clay and some dowels. Also, this foam ball that I just cut in half. I'm using Crayola Model Magic. I have about 10 bags here, 5 white and 5 blue. Before sculpting, I look at a ton of reference photos to get an idea of what his head shape should be. I opened 4 bags and knead them a bit. I'm using Oscar's head to kind of gauge the size, and I'm using a reference to start shaping the head with. I mark out where the mouth will go, then I push in the clay to give the mouth an indentation. I also took out some clay to give it more of a dip. This process took a lot of time to get right. There was a lot of shifting in the weight and fixing the mouth. I wish I could give you some tips on sculpting, but honestly, I just messed with it until it looked right. It took me a couple of tries before I got the shape that was accurate. Really, the best advice I can give you for this is to just try your best. When it was time to put the dowel in him, I realized the bottom was just too thin for me to shove it in, so I laid the dowel on the back of his head and used some extra clay that I got from his mouth to secure it on him. Next, I take a bag of white clay and sculpt his eyes. His eyes are just googly eyes, so there isn't much work to be put into this, thankfully. And, of course, I put his eyes on too low, so I had to cut them off and place them up higher. Now that he looks like one of those melty-eyed popsicles, we can put him to the side while he dries. For his accessories, I'm making 2 cookies. I used 1 bag for each cookie. One of the cookies is going to have a bite mark taken out of it, so I just cut 3 little triangle shapes out and then shaped it to look like a nice rounded bite mark. Using the same clay that I just cut off of the cookie, I'm making some chocolate chips and just pressing them on. To get chips for the other cookie, I just trimmed off a little bit and then reshaped it and pressed them on. I added the dowels and then let them set to dry. While we're waiting on our clay to dry, we can start working on our fur. For this, we're going to need a ball of yarn, blue yarn to be exact, a pair of scissors, a pet brush, and a copy of New Super Mario Bros. For Wii. First, wrap your yarn around whatever game you have, and be sure not to make it too tight. After you've wrapped enough, you can cut it off. Next, get something you can easily tie the yarn to. I'm using this coat hanger. Grab 3 strands from your pile and loop them around the hanger, then pull them through. Once you have all of your strands tied together on the hanger, use your pet brush and with a tapping motion, unravel the yarn until it's smooth to comb through. You can also use a comb to do this, though it may take longer. You're going to get a lot of yarn fluff during this process. Save it if you wish. I have a big bag full of it to give to my mom so she can make pillows. Once your wefts are smooth to comb through, we're going to take a hair straightener, or curler, and flatten the wefts so that they are more manageable. Once you've done that, it's time to cut them off. I broke them up into smaller groups like this and then cut. I like to spread the yarn out a bit to have it lay flatter and cover more area. Once I have it laid out like I like, I use Elmer's glue to seal the edges. I use a brush to make sure that the glue is covering everywhere that I need it to. Once all of my wefts are glued, I wait for them to dry, and after, I can just peel them right off. After they dry, the ends are not very pretty, so we use some scissors to trim them down. And now all of our wefts are complete. Even though we're covering his head with yarn, the white may peek through, so we're just going to clean it up by painting it blue. I'm also painting his mouth black because it's going to be seen through the fur. For the cookies, I tried to mix up a color that would look like a cartoon cookie. The first pass came out a little too dark, so on the second coat it is a bit lighter. For the chocolate chips, I'm using the same dark color that I used for the rim of the flower pot to bring it all together.
Very good.
Before I go straight into gluing things down, I take my time to figure out which wefts work best for different parts of his head, as well as how I want to face them. In order to hide the seam of the weft, I have to put it down facing the wrong direction, and I need the hair to go downwards on his chin. Yarn is usually easy to push around in the direction you want it to go, but just as an added measure, just before the glue fully dries where I attach the seam, I lay the hair down so that it can stick to his chin. I do the exact same thing around his eyes. First I test out which wefts should go where. I cut some wefts to be smaller as I need them. Underneath the top layer, I just put the wefts down in order to fill up the area. I do the same for every other parts that are too thin. Around the mouth, I treat it the same way that I did the chin and wrap it around the jaw. I put some glue on top of the yarn that comes out of the mouth just to give it some more strength and also keep those areas defined. Before we move on, let's make Cookie Monster look a little less possessed by giving him some eyes. I used a black Posca pen and scribbled his eyes on. Finally, we can give Cookie Monster a haircut. I start by cutting off the length that I know I don't want, then it's just a matter of trimming everything until it looks accurate. I make sure not to make horizontal cuts because I want Cookie Monster's fur to look naturally grown out. I cut in an upwards angled motion and fluff it out every now and then. Once we finish cutting and styling, we can admire the mess that we've made. I didn't focus on his back or the sides that much because once he's in the pot surrounded by the flowers, you won't be able to see those parts. Speaking of him being in the flower pot, it's time for our last step, which is to assemble everything. The holes in the foam ball I was using got a little worn out with me constantly moving the pieces around, so I had to readjust it a little bit. Next are the flowers that I chose for Cookie Monster. I wanted to have blue flowers that matched him, so I picked up some hydrangeas. I also wanted some yellow to complement the blue, and I thought the buttercups worked nicely because the white on them can act as milk. Oh my god, did I really type that? The white on the buttercups can act as milk. Yeah, okay. Yeah, whatever. Leave that in. I usually just randomly place the flowers when I put them in, but I do try to not put too many of the same flower right next to each other. Of course, I place them all around his face to hide imperfections and to fill up the whole pot. A good idea to keep in mind is that you don't want to be able to see any of the foam underneath. I also don't recommend using real flowers if you're going to do a project like this. I'm not sure how the clay or the fur would react to being next to something organic, or being covered in water from time to time. I make these as decor pieces that don't involve real living things at all, but I mean, you do you, that's just my advice. Cookie Monster is now complete. I know it looks complicated, but this process was very simple and easy to do. All of the materials are cheap and you can get everything at the dollar store or Walmart. I will also leave a complete list of materials in the description, so be sure to check that out. Here he is next to Oscar. Cookie Monster came out a bit bigger than I anticipated, but I think he looks great. As always, if any of you followed along, I'd love to see what you made. So post it on Instagram and tag me. A link for my Instagram will be in the description. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to see more, hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop. I promise I don't just do kitty stuff, so leave a comment telling me what you'd like to see next. And thank you for watching. Toodles!
Me want cookie!